well. But the patient panel will go forward.
What's interesting about the panel is that so much of what Kelly talked about, Kelly Turner, who actually launched her Radical Remission project here at the Annie Appleseed Project many years ago, and she interviewed several people who were here, including myself and Ann and some others. And so essentially what Kelly did was to document what we've been talking about for many years on the panel. And that is that there are many paths to wellness, and you have to become in charge of your own body. And I like to say that when I realized that I was diagnosed with both cancer and lupus at the same time, I had to put my career aside and become the CEO, COO, CMO, CFO of my own body. And I had to make decisions in all of those areas for A, how is I going to deal with it? How is I getting my brain around it? How is I going to manage my finances? Because I wanted to get well. And how was I going to market it to all the people in my life who were loved ones and friends, this huge Italian family? How was I going to manage all of their emotion over my disease? They were more high maintenance than me actually embarking on my protocol. So I had to do the opposite of what a CMO would do, and that is to try to engage your marketplace and sell your product and take a break and kind of put them all on pause because their emotion was draining me from doing the research that I knew I needed to do to get well. So it was 2000, March 17. I was training for a triathlon. I felt a lump on the outer edge of my right breast. I'd started self-examining when I turned 30. I had this really groovy gynecologist, and she was really ahead of her time. And she said, okay, pardon me, at your 30th birthday, I'm going to teach you how to self-examine. Woohoo! So I started self-examining once a month for many years. And one night I found this lump. It was March. It was in Connecticut. It was freezing cold. And it felt like a mosquito bite. And I thought, okay, it's March. It's not a mosquito bite. But because I'd been self-examining for all these years and getting to know intimately all the lumps and bumps that were made up my breasts, I knew it was different. So I had just had my annual physical, just had a mammogram, went to my doctor the next day and said, I feel something, it feels really foreign, like slippery and hard, and it doesn't feel right. I went and had another mammogram. The mammogram was negative, as had been the one in December, 2.5 months prior. I said to the surgeon, I want to have a biopsy. He said, you don't know what you're talking about. Come back in 6 months. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. So I said, nope. And I started crying, big crocodile tears. And I said, I want a biopsy. I know there's something wrong. And he said, okay. Next day I go in, I have the biopsy. And 2 days later he calls me and he says, so, how are you? I learned a very important lesson. I need to listen to my patients more. You have stage 2B infiltrating ductal carcinoma, very aggressive cancer. You got to do this, and this. And, it was like my head was spinning. So how I process things is I get down on my knees and I pray. And I did. And I meditated on what was happening. And I really kind of knew. I knew there was something wrong. And that started my journey, much like what Kelly Turner was talking about in her documentary, what Ann Fonfa cited all through that documentary, which was so beautiful. Ann, I'm so proud to see you up there. And so I had no one. I knew no one that knew anything about alternative therapies for cancer. I knew no one who could help me, except for the one guy that God put into my life who was my training partner at my gym, and we were training for triathlons. And this guy was just planted in my town from GE. He was a scientist and a doctor. And I told him, and he said, I'm going to help you navigate through this maze of alternative therapies. What are you feeling? What do you want to do? So I said, well, I'm not going to have chemo, and I'm not going to have radiation, and I'm not going to do drugs. I'm going to try to figure out what is going on inside my body. I want to get well. I want to heal. I don't want to be in remission. I want to be healed. And so we started this journey together, and he helped me do all this research. So that was the beginning. And that is much like what most of the patients on the movie that you just saw did. And I saw this quote just the other day, and I thought it was so poignant and so compelling and so apropos. And it goes like this: one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you are going through now. And it will become part of someone else's survival guide. And so that is what the patient panel is. We've had so many people here telling their stories, and it became someone else's survival guide. It gave them the impetus to do research, to talk to them, to become friends with them, to find advocates who had gone through the exact same thing. And before I turn it over to Jenny, who is an incredible young woman with courage and a crazy story, I want to just point out that we had other people. We typically have 4 of us on the panel, and we had other people that we sort of loosely had lined up. And then it turned out that everybody canceled, or we couldn't, people dropped out. We were sort of kind of waiting to see what we were going to do, because there's always someone in this audience who could be on the patient panel. There's so many incredible stories just in this audience. I mean, I know many of you. And we're here for each other. We encourage each other. But I thought, how appropriate is this that we only have one person on the panel with me, because there are 2 really important people that are missing here in this conference this year, and they were on our previous panels. And Ann and I did an event in New York before our last Annie Appleseed conference in 2020, and Ann, myself, Elisa Gorman, and Catherine Daughtery, Henning Saup, and John Malanka. If you're in the audience, John and Henning, please give a wave, okay? So we all did this small sort of Annie Appleseed Northeast conference, and Elisa and Catherine spoke, and Henning was our keynote speaker. John Malanka zoomed in from California, and we were all together, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is just so incredible, because I want to honor them. I mean, there's usually another seat there. So I want to honor them with these empty seats, and just, I miss them so much. We were all soul sisters. We all trudged through this together. Catherine was someone I met in kindergarten, and then she introduced me to a girl, beautiful, vibrant, young woman like you, Elisa. And we all hung out together. We were all in the same lane. And so I just want to kind of dedicate our panel today to those 2 women, and also many others that have been on the panel. So I thank you, Henning, so much for everything that you do. You're so compassionate. You're just an incredible man, and you come all the way from Germany, and you have this clinic, and Catherine came to your clinic after our last conference in 2020 and got stuck there because of COVID restrictions. So happily, she was there, thriving and enjoying her life with you and in the clinic in Germany and all your people. So I thought, how cool is that, right? That she wasn't suffering. And John Malanka and I met at a conference 5 or 6 years ago, And we've been best friends ever since. And we've been on this cancer journey together. John cared for his lovely wife and was the ultimate caregiver. I don't think I know anybody who cared more for a human being than John. And he is an incredible advocate, very generous, just like you, Henning. Both two very generous men who give of themselves and their resources and their finances and their love and their caring for so many people unconditionally. And so I just want to say thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over. So it's our family. We're here. It's our familia. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Bradley. And you can read about her in the journal, but she has an organization called
Shrink the Mutant. I don't know if I'd call it an organization as much as I started an Instagram account after I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was diagnosed in 2017 after 2 years of being misdiagnosed because, quote, "Oh, you're young. I just think that's a lipoma, a fatty tissue," is what my doctor said. And at the time, I had no reason to think, oh, it's totally probably breast cancer. So there was no questioning about it. It was just like, well, the lady in a white doctor's coat says it's not, so no big deal, right? And then she ended up telling me, I'm going to send you to a breast specialist because they, quote, cut these out all the time and you'll have a better aesthetic outcome. I could do it, but I'm going to go ahead and send you to her. So I went to a breast specialist months later because it was not an emergent situation as far as they were concerned. And that specialist took one look, not even, like no touching, no palpating yet. And she immediately said, I'm so sorry. I'm pretty sure this is cancer. You need to have a biopsy. My husband and I happened to go to the appointment together because we thought we were just doing a consultation to schedule, the excision of it. And we ended up looking at each other and going, well, I actually said to the doctor, it's pretty close to the end of the year. I haven't met my deductible yet. Can we wait until January to do this? And she essentially told me, with what she knew about my case being already 2 years there, that it's probably not going to change radically in 2 weeks. So yes, why don't you could come back if you wanted to. And then my husband and I, literally in the moment, thought, we're here, let's just do it. So I walked across the hall on a day that I had no expectation about anything cancer and anything biopsy and any procedures, and immediately had the biopsy. It was, as I mentioned, it's 2 weeks before the end of the year, so you can tell it was leading into Christmas. And what ended up happening is that they called me, Christmas was on a Monday, I think, and they called me on that Friday before Christmas and said, it is a carcinoma of the breast, but we have to send it out for further pathology. But because of the holidays, back to back of Christmas and New Year's, it could possibly take longer than normal, but we'll call you when we get the results. But don't freak out if it takes, maybe even 10 days. So that gave me this amazing, really an on-ramp to, immediately that night, what did I start doing? On the computer, right? Researching. I that night ordered books. I started watching documentaries, etc. So I had this breadth of being able to not be immediately put on the cancer machine. And it gave me the opportunity to learn, to watch things like the various radical remission, reading those books, etc. And in the back of my mind, thank you, Lord, truly, in the back of my mind, I had this idea that I'm pretty sure that I've heard before that there's something with vitamin C in cancer. And I'm pretty sure I've heard before, I think I watched a special one time on PBS about something with, it's called anti-cancer. So somewhere in that lovely long-term memory of ours, I was able to pull out those cues and Googled those things. So that led me to Dr. David Servan-Schreiber's anti-cancer work, and that was one of those books that I ordered that very night. And then it also led me to Radical Remission, and ordered that book that night, and also led me to the Reardon Clinic with their IV vitamin C research, and lo and behold, I'd lived 10 minutes away from them. So I was able to start my Reardon protocol before I even was able to have my standard oncology appointment. And I know that not everybody has, if I would say, that luxury, but it's how it worked for me. Again, thank God, praise God. So with that, I will say this part, and then we can kind of maybe share back and forth a little bit. I have a standard of care oncologist. I have a naturopathic oncologist. I've seen a variety of surgeons, etc. But with my particular pathology, they have never recommended chemo because, quote, we don't want to do that to your body. They have never recommended radiation because, quote, we would burn right through you. This is the conventional care telling me this. And then with surgery, the surgeon said, you need to shrink that tumor, so I'm not going to operate on you for at least 6 months. So that's where my Instagram name Shrink the Mutant came from, because cancer is just our own mutated cells. So I started that Instagram account privately just to share with my family and friends what I was doing, and some of those friends started saying, I love you, you're doing some weird stuff, but I think other people need to know about this. And so I ended up opening that up to be not just a private account, to be able to share it with more people and be able to get connected with more of our amazing integrative and holistic cancer community, and found other people like Anne and Stephanie and other awesome people in this room. And so I was so thankful for organizations like Annie Appleseed Project and other people and companies, et cetera, that are represented here, because when we come to stuff like this and when we get to meet each other, it really is, I was saying this to somebody else a little bit ago, it's like the gas that fuels the next part of our journey, right? So thank you, Julia, for what you do and all the work that you put behind the scenes of producing this whole thing, et cetera. And let me cut to the chase on some of the stuff of what I did really fast. So just to remind you, no surgery, no chemo, no radiation. That's not to say that I've never been in conversations about that stuff with doctors, and I continue to have surgery conversations. So diagnosed in 2017, it's 2023, so I've been living with cancer, well, we know, right, longer than when we are actually diagnosed, right? So we have counted back to the size of my tumor when I was diagnosed, and using the various research that's out there, I have said this to my doctors, and the various doctors go, I think that probably could be. I've probably been living with cancer at least 10 years. So I like to say, and again, you're in this room, you know, we are living and thriving, right? So my big thing is I want to do more than survive it. I want to thrive through it. And I definitely totally believe that healing is possible and that God designed our bodies to heal. And so I am doing what I can to support my body in doing that healing. Thank you.
You are one amazing girl.
Thanks. I probably am older than I look, too. It's just that I have a youthful energy.
So I didn't do chemo, radiation, tamoxifen, or double mastectomy, which is what I was recommended to do in Greenwich Hospital, which is part of Yale and New Haven Health. And I went to Memorial Sloan Kettering because I lived in Connecticut, and it was, right around the corner. And they basically told me the same thing. And I prayed about it, and I started doing research. And as I was doing the research, I became really excited that there was an alternative option for me. That, being an athlete and being so in tune with my body, I thought, okay, I've got to figure out what's going on. And I, too, learned that my cancer was probably growing for 10 years. It's pretty typical. And so I decided to do much of what was depicted in the film, and that was to do the Gerson diet. So I got a dumpster, and I threw out every single thing in my house except for, clothes and furniture. I threw out carpeting. I threw out all my makeup, all my cleaning products, all my toiletries, hair products, you name it. I threw it all out because I knew that that I was living with toxins, and I was consuming toxins in my food. And so for me, being sort of a problem solver, it was easier for me to throw everything out and start fresh, because I couldn't pick and choose what was good and what wasn't. So I said, that's it, throwing everything out, microwave, everything, out the door. So I went to the farmer's market and I started buying all these greens and things that I'd never even heard of. I'm Italian, I was eating a Mediterranean diet, thought it was healthy, chicken and fish and cheese and bread. And so I became a raw food vegan, and the platform of my diet was wheatgrass. So for me, wheatgrass was that one thing that if I was on a deserted island that I couldn't live without if I had the choice. So it helped me to detox. Like Anne, I was doing coffee enemas, colonics, completely detoxed everything that was in my body, did like a 21-day water juice fast, and then in my mind, and what I had read was that you need to make the ground fertile, like my old Italian grandmother when she was planting the seeds. You had to make the ground fertile for the blossom and to grow. And so I made the ground fertile inside my body to then take in the nutrients and the plan of care that I embarked on. And let me tell you, it was not easy. It was really difficult. It was so hard going to the grocery store. This is 23 years ago. There were no websites. There was nothing. There was Annie Appleseed, and that's how we met. But, it was tough. So, and everybody I knew thought I was crazy, except for my two parents, who usually you would think probably would have been nervous. But my parents had both had cancer. My mom had cancer when she was 30, uterine, and the doctor said, you need chemotherapy. And she said, oh, well, I don't think so, because I have 3 young kids at home, ages 5, 3, and 1, and I don't have time for chemo. So she never had a drop of drug. And she's 91. She looks phenomenal. And my dad had prostate cancer when he was 69, and they told him that he should have radiation, and he said, heck no, I'm not having radiation. I want to have sex again. So he never had any either. So they were like, good, do what you need to do. So they were sort of like my two people that were supporting me. And so I still follow that diet pretty much. I mean, I now eat some fish once in a while if it's clean, or I'll have a piece of cheese once in a while or a dessert, but for a good 12 years, I did not consume anything other than organic fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, apricot kernels, wheatgrass, you know the plan, right? You guys all know the plan, because that was my RX, so if I'm going to cheat, then I'm cheating my way back to getting sick again. So that's sort of what I did.
So with my protocol at the time, I will say the conventional oncology world, the one thing they could offer me was tamoxifen, which a lot of you are familiar with. And because I had that on-ramp to be able to research, I was also able to use other people's stories. And if you don't already do this, here's a fun tip for you on social media. You can use the hashtag. So I used the hashtag tamoxifen. And I was able to read firsthand accounts, not just clinical studies, but truly firsthand accounts of what it was like being on that drug and what it was helping people with, or what their side effects were, etc. And then with that, and I always say every year I go back to that conversation with the Lord and I say, okay, God, whatever you need me to see about this drug, if it's what I'm supposed to be on for my body for such a time as this, would you please help me see that and know that? And so thus far, my answers to the doctors on that is always, because after every year, I always say, no, thank you. It's not a no forever. I'm not saying no forever. I'm saying no, not right at this moment. And I also say this, but would you please put a note in my chart that I can have that prescription if I decide, like, can I call in and just get it? And we just reevaluate it every year, basically. So that's the one drug they can give me. And I will also say this about it, because of my family history, not of cancer, but of other things, there are risks with that drug that I am just not willing to take at this season of my life. So that's that part. So with all that, and that surgeon saying, I'm not going to operate on you for 6 months, it gave me this ability to go hardcore, and I would even say reboot, right? Reboot my system for at least 6 months. And so I was in the clinic 3 days a week, Reardon Clinic, 3 days a week, doing IV vitamin C, radical nutrition switch. I was not eating, whatever the awesome diet was at that time. I was like Pop-Tarts and Cherry Cola, girl, getting me through grad school. But anyway, so that radically shifted to where I was already gluten-free, I should say that. So I wasn't maybe eating Pop-Tarts at that point because I didn't make gluten-free ones, but essentially you get the idea, right? I was like living in a toxic soup. So the other things I did in it, like what you were saying too, is I reduced my toxic burden. So switching anything that went on my body and in my body. So any lotions, hair care, skin care, shower care, makeup, the things that I was drinking, eating, consuming, etc. And then detoxing, so infrared saunas, coffee enemas, juicing, the various, And so within that 6 months, so in my particular case, they do breast MRIs with me. And my body also does not love the contrast. That is not a fun game to play. And I have literally called different radiological centers in different states to try to find one that will do a breast MRI without contrast. And they all refuse to do it, the ones that I call. So if you know of any, let me know, which I will. Okay, great. So I have done full body MRIs through Prenuvo, which if you don't know about Prenuvo, please, you're welcome to come talk to me about it. I do not get any commission or affiliation to say this, but I have a discount code if you are interested in a full body MRI scan with no, that's no radiation and no any type of IV with it. Anywho, so essentially I was able to show through that 6-month MRI that I had reduced the tumor by 20%, just doing these holistic therapies. 20% in conventional world is not a clinical response. It has to be 30%, according to them. But that still, again, gave me this breath to go, okay, well, something is working. So that something is working, we continued to, I had conversations with that surgeon's office, but it became this thing where we were like, I'm going to keep trying the way I'm doing it. I'm going to keep trying the way I'm doing it. So my tumor remained grossly stable, essentially months, years, etc. And at month 22-ish of my cancer journey, I had cryoablation. So cryoablation is where they freeze the tumor from the inside out, and through a series of freezing, thawing, freezing, thawing, freezing, thawing, it creates so much trauma to the cancer cells that the cancer cells may die. It is in clinical trials for breast cancer. It is in the trials for tumors that are 2 centimeters and smaller, and it has very, very, very good results for small tumors, especially that are not complicated. My tumor was larger, and keep this between us and I guess that YouTube page, but my skin has always been involved. So I knew from the get-go with cryoablation that the surgeon was also going to have to freeze my skin. So I literally had frostbite from the inside out, and I had to grow brand new skin. I did not have a skin graft. The surgeon kept saying, I think you might have to have a skin graft in the next few months. We'll do this procedure as is now, and then we'll monitor it, etc. And I would get to send him pictures of the wound area, and he kept saying, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And I ended up not having to have a skin graft. I was able to grow all that skin by myself and God's plants. I don't know. Anywho, so if you are interested in knowing more about cryoablation and you don't know about it, you're welcome to come talk to me and Prenuvo and other things. But so those were some of the key things I did. Cryoablation did not cure me. That's not to say it doesn't work for other people, but because of my particular case with how my skin was involved, they say that they could not get enough margin because he didn't want to keep freezing more and more of my skin. So I did have like the middle of my tumor that shrunk and got reabsorbed into my body essentially. And then because I can talk to you all about it, I can say it like this. So the middle of my tumor shrunk, and then there's exterior of it. I call them my Mickey Mouse ears. So there are some parts of it that are still active, but living and thriving with cancer. So.
Yay! Well, I'm glad to hear that you have a good relationship with your doctors. Unlike me, in my early journey, all of my doctors fired me, and they said, I'm really sorry, but if you're not going to do chemo or radiation, we can't help you. So I had to find my team of experts and doctors, and it was really trying. And I took 6 months off from my career and did research and watched videos and went to conferences. And there was hardly anything back then, really hardly anything. But I made it through. I did the research, and I implemented my plan of care. And I decided that I should have a lumpectomy to kind of see what was going on. I'm kind of like, I like to know the diagnostics, like what's going on, like what's my D level, what's my C level, what's my hormone panel, you know, what's going on inside my body. I wanted a sort of a view so I could figure out what the next move was. So I went to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston because my cousin knew the professor of surgical oncology there, and he ended up becoming a very good friend of mine. We're still friends. And he wrote a foreword for my book. I wrote a little reference guide years later. And he said, okay, you know, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. So this was like 4 months later after I'd already implemented this plan of care. So they, you know, they rush you in, they do all the blood work, they do all the tests. Now, they were doing sonograms on me, you know, ultrasounds, and I have not had mammography since that day because mammography is only about 50% accurate. It didn't pick up my my tumor, and I have dense breasts, which about 60% of the women and men, mostly men, have dense breasts, and so it wasn't picking up anything. So anyway, I had all the tests. They said, okay, what's your plan B? I said, sure, fly home to Connecticut, you know, after the lumpectomy. And they're like, well, what if we find something, you know, in the margins? And I said, no, I'm good. You know, I'm going to continue on my plan of care. So we went in, did the lumpectomy, and my margins were clean, and all of my blood work was in normal range. And that was 4 months on this plan of care, of just radically changing everything about my life. The people I was in love with, who were no longer in love with me because I had cancer. The people that I worked with because I didn't see them, the stress of work, changing my environment, changing my home life, taking a break from life and just kind of relaxing and trying to heal. It was really difficult, but it was the best decision I ever made in my life. And I felt somehow excited. Here I had like active cancer and lupus simultaneously, but I actually felt excited that I was actually part of my own healing platform and able to make decisions. Because look, death is 100%. We're all going to die. But we have a choice as to how we live that life and what quality of life do we prefer? What do we want for ourselves? What do we envision? And I kind of envisioned, well, if this was the end, then I was going to go to Italy, rent a villa, and eat pasta for the rest of my life. And that was sort of my vision at the time. And so I'm doing the same thing, pretty much.
I did not have a vision of going to Italy. But I did have, as Dr. Turner mentioned, I did have a strong will to live and a strong belief that I was not going to die from cancer.
Yeah, me too.
And I had a strong hopefulness and a strong belief that we, like I mentioned before, are designed to heal. So one of the things that, it sounds, I don't know, weird and nerdy, whenever I get like a nick on my hand or whatnot, for some reason, I hate it, but I always go, and it's healing. And even those small little places on my body that end up scabbing over and healing, that is actually motivational and encouraging to me, again, of like, oh, my body's doing it. Like, I can grow skin, I can grow a scab, or whatever the thing is, right? And so even in these little ways, these little things, the little things that we do every day, like all the littles add up, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
they do. So I guess the bottom line is that we are radical and we believe we're healed, and you have to have a vision for what you want. And, you know, we all have our journeys, and we all have to have a piece about our journey. So you have to have your own individual piece, whether you do chemo or you don't, or you implement natural protocols or alternative protocols. You have to have a piece about it. And what I find that makes me so utterly sad is that I talk to so many men and women, and I've talked to a lot of men with breast cancer, because there's a ton of firemen in New York City who have breast cancer as a result of 9/11, like tons of them, and they're dying. And what I believe is that you have to have a piece about what you do, because if you allow your doctor to make that decision, or your husband or your wife or your friend or whoever, your mom, your dad, if you're allowing them to make that decision for you, then you're not empowering your own self. And I found that many people who don't do that are really living with a lot of regret. But it's never too late to start, right?
One of the things that I did literally in my first month after being diagnosed was I sent, or I shared with my family and some of my close friends my boundaries and my emotional boundaries. And I literally said, if you cannot talk positively with me about this and support me on the path I am choosing, then I'm going to ask you not to talk about cancer with me at all in this season. So that was really helpful.
Well, I think that's a good line to end on.
Great.
So anyway, thanks for allowing us to share a little bit today, and I hope it encouraged you. And this is what we do at the Annie Appleseed Project. As Ann Fampa would say, there are many paths to wellness, and you have to find your path, and it has to be based on education and getting with your tribe, your team of experts to help you, because we can't do it alone. And if it wasn't for Ann's website, which was probably the only website that I ever found in my journey, I would have had a more difficult time. So thank you, Ann, for starting your website and for being my friend.
So, some of you may not know that Julia is our meeting planner. She has been for many, many years. And Julia and I put together this conference. We could not do it without each other, and it could be really interesting. I always say my shtick is, it's good enough. But Julia is a very serious, dedicated, it's got to be just right. And that is why your conference is just right, because of Julia. So, did you want questions, or?
Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to make?
Walk to the microphone if you have a question or a comment, and then I'm going to announce some prize winners. So while we're waiting, I'll do a winner. How about red ticket 2812? Red 2812.
Just a quick question about iodine supplementation. Did anyone try that?
Yes. Yeah, I've done probably everything imaginable. I've tried everything, and I've actually tried it based on diagnostics. So we had a gal named Lynn Farrow, PhD, who spoke here. She lives out in Long Island, and she discovered that there was a huge issue with breast cancer and lack of iodine. And so I read her book, I met her, And she said, go home and go to the drugstore and get like that, we used to call it mercurochrome. And you draw a circle on your belly, around your belly button, and just walk around without your top on for like half an hour. And if it absorbed into your body, your body is in need of iodine. And so I ended up going on some Iodorol and some other supplements. But yeah, iodine's a big, huge part of it.
Okay, you have 2 questions over there.
Oh, come on up. Oh, is the mic on?
Oh, we have a mic here.
Okay, great.
Okay, I'm new at breast cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago, and now I just had a lumpectomy. And of course the doctor wants me to go through radiation and tamoxifen, and I told her I'm not going to do any of that. But yes, and I feel very strong about it. But she wants to diagnose, keep me diagnosing every 3 months. And I don't want to fall in that game, I want to find a doctor, and that's the search that I am at right now. I need to find a doctor that I can go to that will help me make the right decisions. So I don't want to take any pills, and I want to go that, I don't want to do the conventional stuff. So if anybody here can help me find a doctor that I can go to and can listen to what I want to do instead of, what I should do instead of what the medicine says.
In South Florida.
I think you're very brave. Where do you live?
I live in Fort Lauderdale, just 20
Okay.
minutes from here.
So we should probably talk with her off record, privately. We probably have some people for you.
Wonderful. It's funny when people ask me, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm new at this. It's been 6 months only, so.
I would also say for anybody else in general that might not live specifically in South Florida that, there are naturopathic oncologists that are specifically trained and licensed to work in cancer care specifically. And there are organizations like Believe Big, probably Radical Remission probably has a list, Cancer Doctor Outside. There are specific doctors that can help us specifically, and that's one thing is I always say my naturopathic oncologist gives me a menu. So I'm getting my menu from him. I'm still choosing what of those things that seems to resonate with me in that moment type of thing. But that's one part of my cancer care team is a naturopathic oncologist, and I get regular blood work done multiple times a year, and the various things, the hormone panels, the nutrition panels to see what I'm deficient in. We're taking care of our whole entire terrain, and so it's important for me to know what things, I'm not blindly just throwing darts at anything. I'm trying to be really specific about how I'm supporting my body in that season. And stress has definitely come out in my blood panels. There's been different seasons in my journey where because of external circumstances in my life, there are some things that have shot up, and we, gather together as a team, and they go, you do this, you do this, you do this, you know how to do this, Jenny. And I go, you're right, I do, okay. And then lo and behold, that very next panel, everything is balanced again. So we know what to do. That's my encouragement also to all of us. It's like we know what to do the basics, go back to the basics, we know what to do. You can do it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I also want to thank Anne again. She was my first phone call when I got the diagnosis, and she guided me through, what to do in the beginning. So
In
thank you.
total reveal, we already know each other because Sylvia works for the company that sells me the aloe vera that I drink every single day. And we've had many, many conversations.
Been on the phone every week
Beautiful.
almost.
That's beautiful. Well, there's other doctors here as well, and there's other advocates here that we could put you in contact with. So come and see me after the panel.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I am a cancer survivor,
Yay.
23 years. I wanted to share that it's really important to recognize the project that some women make decisions about what they want that happen with their body, and then that they have a doctor that respects that
Yeah.
decision. And then, for example, I went to similar process, and then I went through 5 doctors then to get my doctor. But I just also wanted to add that, we have been talking about categories that they are helping or different type of practice then that have to do with lifestyle. And I think then that I was very tired. And then I heard this, this repetitions about that categories then that help us then to basically to be healthy. And then, one thing then that, for example, for me it's really important then that we include the arts. And why the arts? Because the arts is another way of doing meditation. It's another way then to think about the culture of illness in our cultures, and that somehow we have to think about gender crisis sometime, and then we have to be thinking that our body does have this little mark and things like that in the case of women, and then in the case of men also then when they have all these questions about gender. And I think through the arts, it could be music, painting, drawing, and so on. And then the other things then that is important then is to look at the literature, that philosophers, people that do literature, the artists, then basically they are making a story about the experience of their illness in the work that they're doing. And then I'm saying that because I'm an artist. And then, for me it was really important then, in one hand, to listen the story of women, because I wanted to learn about the experience of other women, because then I would learn about what decisions those women was making. And then I didn't want to be traumatized in the context. So they have a lot of questions then that one asks oneself when one go through that experience. It's not just mortality, but it's all these kind of things then that our culture also forces us to think what is the culture of illness. We have to be thinking about that this body without mark, and then all this charge about sexuality within the context of all those changes. So for me, at the time, they didn't have any of those things, but I did meditation. I created art I did my first exhibition when I was going through chemo. I have 2 pieces of art. And then I have created art about using my own hair, using things then that, somehow fall. I caught my hair before, for example, because I didn't want to pass through that trauma that my hair fall. And then I tried to simplify in a way that the experience of illness in a way that not will add more suffering. But at least for me, that meditation of it's important then that we recognize and then we take, like for example, the work of Joe Spencer in London, basically to do a critique to the medical system in the ways then that they wanted to force her, for example, to have a mastectomy, which is, for example, what we're still talking about, that how the medical industry, then they have a vision of what kind of treatment, for example, women should have when they have this illness. So for me, including the art is another type of things in that question deeply other aspect too about our culture and how we think about what is breast cancer, what is illness in that context. Thank you.